This video contains audio content only. There are no visual elements or images accompanying the audio. If you're expecting to see video footage, please note that this is an intentional audio-only presentation. We recommend listening to this content rather than watching the screen. Thank you for your understanding and enjoy the audio. Hello and welcome to today's exploration of one of humanity's most fascinating and controversial cultural practices. Today, we're diving deep into a tradition that challenges our modern understanding of relationships, hospitality, and cultural values. In the remote regions of northern Namibia, among the Himba people, exists a practice that has captured the attention of anthropologists, human rights activists, and cultural scholars worldwide. The tradition known as Okujepisa Omukazendu. Before we delve into the specifics, it's important to acknowledge that cultural practices often challenge our own worldview and comfort zones. Our goal today is not to judge but to understand, to explore how different societies have developed unique ways of maintaining social bonds and community ties. What we're about to discuss may seem shocking or controversial to many listeners, but it's crucial to approach this topic with cultural sensitivity while also examining its broader implications for human rights and social justice in our modern world. 1. Cultural context and background of the Himba people. Deep in the arid landscapes of northern Namibia, where the harsh desert winds shape both the terrain and the people who call it home, lives one of Africa's most distinctive indigenous groups, the Himba people. Their story is not just about survival in one of Earth's most extreme environments. It's about maintaining a rich cultural heritage that has remained remarkably resistant to the influences of modernization. The Himba, or Ovahimba as they call themselves, number between 20,000 to 50,000 people, though exact figures are difficult to determine due to their semi-nomadic lifestyle. They primarily inhabit the Kunene and Omusati regions, an area that straddles the border between Namibia and Angola. This is not just their home. It's a harsh paradise where temperatures can soar above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 38 degrees Celsius, and water is so scarce that it has shaped their entire way of life. What makes the Himba particularly fascinating is their steadfast dedication to traditional ways of life in the face of encroaching modernization. Unlike many indigenous groups who have been forced to adapt to contemporary lifestyles, the Himba have maintained their cultural practices with remarkable resilience. Their distinctive appearance alone tells a story of cultural preservation. Women are known for covering their bodies with ojese, a mixture of ochre and butterfat that gives their skin a reddish tinge. This isn't merely for aesthetic purposes, it serves as protection against the harsh desert sun and insects, while also embodying their ideals of beauty and cultural identity. The Himba's social structure is built around a pastoral lifestyle that has sustained them for generations. Cattle represent far more than just wealth or sustenance, they are the cornerstone of Himba society. A family's herd size directly correlates to their social status, though interestingly, many Himba are reluctant to disclose the exact number of their cattle to outsiders, a practice born from generations of protecting their most valuable assets from theft. Their villages, or omanda, are carefully designed with deep symbolic meaning. Each is built in a circular pattern around the okuruo, sacred fire, which serves as a spiritual connection to their ancestors. This fire is never allowed to die out, as it represents the continuous link between the living and the dead. The chief's hut always faces west, while other dwellings are positioned in relation to this central point, creating a physical manifestation of their social hierarchy. The Himba's relationship with modernization is complex and selective. While they have resisted many aspects of contemporary life, they aren't completely isolated from the modern world. Some communities have adapted certain conveniences while steadfastly maintaining their core cultural practices. This selective adaptation demonstrates a remarkable ability to preserve cultural identity while navigating the pressures of an increasingly interconnected world. Their language, Ojihimba, a dialect of Herero, carries the weight of their oral traditions and cultural knowledge. Through this language, stories of ancestors, traditional practices, and cultural values are passed down from generation to generation. The Himba's oral tradition is rich with tales of survival, spiritual beliefs, and social codes that have helped maintain their cultural cohesion. Education among the Himba takes a different form from what we might recognize. Children learn through direct participation in daily activities. Boys begin learning about cattle herding from a young age, while girls are taught the responsibilities of maintaining a household and the intricate practices of their culture. This practical education system has successfully preserved their way of life for generations. One of the most striking aspects of Himba culture is their concept of time, which differs significantly from Western linear time. For the Himba, time is not measured in hours or minutes but in events and activities. Their day is structured around the needs of their cattle, the position of the sun, and community activities. This different perception of time reflects a deeper philosophical approach to life, one that prioritizes community needs and natural rhythms over artificial schedules. The role of women in Himba society is particularly complex. While they have specific duties and responsibilities, their status within the community isn't simply defined by gender roles. Women are responsible for building homes, milking cattle, and raising children. They also play crucial roles in certain ceremonies and have their own forms of power within the community structure, though this power operates within traditional frameworks that can seem restrictive by modern standards. Religion and spirituality pervade every aspect of Himba life. They practice a form of ancestor worship, believing that their deceased relatives continue to influence daily life. The sacred fire, maintained by a firekeeper, serves as a connection to Mukuru, their supreme being, through the ancestors. This spiritual framework provides structure to their society and influences everything from daily decisions to major life events. The Himba's relationship with their environment is both practical and spiritual. Their knowledge of local plants, weather patterns, and animal behavior represents generations of accumulated wisdom. This intimate connection with their environment has allowed them to survive in one of Africa's most challenging landscapes, developing sustainable practices long before sustainability became a global concern. 2. The practice of Okujepisa Omukazendu, origins, rules, and implementation. Okujepisa Omukazendu, which literally translates to offering a wife to a guest, represents one of the most controversial yet deeply embedded cultural practices of the Himba people. To understand this practice, we must first strip away our modern preconceptions and examine it within its cultural context, while also acknowledging the complex implications it carries in today's world. The practice is believed to be centuries old, though its exact origins are difficult to trace due to the oral nature of Himba history. According to tribal elders, it emerged as a way to strengthen bonds between families and communities in an environment where survival often depended on strong social networks. The practice is far more structured and regulated than outsiders might initially assume, with specific rules governing who can participate and under what circumstances. Here's how the practice typically unfolds. When a trusted male guest visits a Himba household, the host may offer his wife to spend the night with the visitor. This offer isn't made to strangers or tourists, a point that tribal leaders consistently emphasize. The guest must be a close friend or family member, someone who has earned a deep level of trust within the community. The husband sleeps in another hut or outside if no alternative accommodation is available. What makes this practice particularly fascinating from an anthropological perspective is its role in maintaining social cohesion. The Himba believe it serves multiple purposes. It prevents jealousy between men, strengthens friendships, and ensures that community bonds remain strong. In a society where resources are scarce and survival often depends on mutual aid, these strong social bonds are crucial. The rules governing this practice are complex and nuanced. For instance, while men can offer their wives to guests, women technically have the right to refuse sexual relations, though they are expected to share the sleeping space regardless. There's also a lesser-known variation where women can choose female friends for their husbands, though this is reportedly much rarer. The practice exists within a broader system of marriage and relationship customs. The Himba are polygamous, with men often having multiple wives. This context is crucial for understanding how Okujepisa Omukazendu functions within their society. The practice typically involves the youngest or most recent wife, as she often has a different status within the household hierarchy. Interestingly, genetic studies conducted in Himba communities have revealed that approximately 70% of children are raised by men who are not their biological fathers. This statistic reflects not just the practice of Okujepisa Omukazendu, but the broader sexual and reproductive dynamics within Himba society. The community's approach to paternity differs significantly from Western concepts, with social fatherhood often taking precedence over biological parentage. The practice has evolved over time, though perhaps not as much as one might expect. While some younger Himba are beginning to question or reject these traditions, many communities continue to observe them. This persistence speaks to the deep cultural significance of the practice and its role in maintaining social structures that have helped the Himba survive for generations. In recent years, there have been attempts to formalize the practice within Namibia's legal framework. In 2014, Kazimir Jundo, a Himba lawmaker and member of the Democratic Turnhale Alliance, proposed legislation to protect and regulate the practice. His argument centered on the practice's role in preventing domestic violence and maintaining social harmony. However, this proposal sparked significant controversy and debate, leading his political party to distance itself from the suggestion. The economic aspects of this practice are rarely discussed but are significant. In a society where cattle represent wealth and status, strong social bonds can mean the difference between survival and destitution during times of drought or hardship. The practice helps maintain a network of mutual obligation and support that can be called upon in times of need. Modern documentation of the practice has been challenging, as many Himba communities are understandably protective of their traditions and wary of outsiders who might misinterpret or sensationalize their customs. This has led to some misunderstandings and misrepresentations in media coverage, particularly regarding the extent and nature of the practice. The role of consent within this practice is complex and often misunderstood by outsiders. While women are expected to participate in the custom, there are traditional mechanisms for refusal and negotiation. However, these mechanisms exist within a patriarchal framework that many modern observers find problematic. This tension between traditional practices and contemporary human rights standards represents one of the key challenges in understanding and evaluating the practice. 3. Social and cultural implications, a complex web of relationships and power. The social and cultural implications of Okujepisa Omukazendu extend far beyond the immediate act itself, creating ripple effects that touch every aspect of Himba society. This practice serves as a lens through which we can examine broader questions about marriage, power dynamics, gender roles, and community cohesion in traditional societies. At its core, the practice reflects a fundamentally different conception of marriage and intimacy than what most modern societies embrace. For the Himba, marriage isn't solely about romantic love or exclusive sexual access. It's a complex social institution that serves multiple community functions. The practice of wife sharing isn't seen as infidelity or adultery in their cultural context. Rather, it's viewed as a legitimate extension of marriage's social role. The power dynamics within these arrangements are particularly fascinating. While men appear to hold the primary decision-making power, the reality is more nuanced. Women in Himba society have developed their own forms of influence and agency within the constraints of their traditional system. For instance, while they may not be able to directly refuse participation in Okujepisa Omukazendu, they have developed subtle ways of exercising choice and preference. The practice has significant implications for community relationships. In many cases, it creates complex webs of obligation and reciprocity between families. These relationships can be activated during times of hardship, creating a social safety net that has helped the Himba survive in their challenging environment. When one family faces difficulties, whether it's a poor harvest, loss of cattle, or other challenges, they can rely on these established relationships for support. The impact on children and family structures is particularly interesting. Unlike Western societies where paternity is typically viewed as a binary fact, the Himba have a more fluid conception of fatherhood. Children may have multiple father figures in their lives, and the community takes collective responsibility for their upbringing. This approach to child rearing has created strong community bonds and resilient family structures that can adapt to various challenges. The practice also has implications for inheritance and property rights. In a society where cattle represent the primary form of wealth, the complex relationships created through Okujepisa Omukazendu can influence how resources are distributed across generations. Children may have claims on multiple family groups' resources, creating a more distributed system of wealth and support. The emotional aspects of these arrangements are rarely discussed but are crucial to understanding their full impact. While the practice is normalized within Himba culture, individuals still experience complex emotions around these arrangements. Some anthropological studies have documented cases of jealousy, attachment, and complex emotional bonds that develop between all parties involved. The practice has also influenced the development of conflict resolution mechanisms within Himba society. When disputes arise, whether related to the practice itself or to other matters, the existing networks of relationships created through Okujepisa Omukazendu often play a role in mediating and resolving these conflicts. There's also a generational aspect to consider. As younger Himba are increasingly exposed to alternative lifestyles and value systems through education and technology, their attitudes toward traditional practices are evolving. Some young people are beginning to question these customs, while others defend them as integral to their cultural identity. This generational tension is creating new dynamics within Himba communities. The practice has implications for women's health and autonomy that cannot be ignored. While traditional supporters argue that it prevents promiscuity and strengthens community bonds, critics point out that women have limited agency in these arrangements and may face increased health risks. The high HIV/AIDS rates in Namibia add another layer of complexity to these concerns. The social status implications are also significant. For men, participating in these arrangements can be a way of demonstrating wealth and social standing. Having multiple wives and being able to offer hospitality in this way is seen as a mark of prosperity and social importance. For women, their position within these arrangements can influence their status within the community, though not always in ways that outside observers might expect. The practice has also influenced the development of leadership structures within Himba communities. The networks of relationships created through these arrangements often align with and reinforce traditional power structures, influencing who has voice and authority within the community. 4. Modern controversies and debates. Tradition meets contemporary challenges. The practice of Okujepisa Omukazendu has become a lightning rod for debates about cultural preservation versus human rights, traditional practices versus modern values, and the limits of cultural relativism in our globalized world. These discussions have intensified particularly since 2014. When the practice gained international attention following attempts to formalize it in Namibian law. The most visible controversy erupted when Kazongir Jundo, a Himba lawmaker in the Democratic Turnhale Alliance, DTA, proposed legislation to legally protect the practice. His argument centered on cultural preservation and what he viewed as the practice's social benefits, including its supposed role in reducing domestic violence. However, this proposal sparked immediate and intense backlash from multiple sectors of Namibian society. The response from women's rights organizations was particularly swift and forceful. Namibian feminists and activists argued that the practice, regardless of its traditional context, essentially amounts to institutionalized rape. They pointed out that women's consent in these arrangements is often theoretical rather than practical, given the social and economic pressures they face. Organizations like Women Solidarity Namibia have been vocal in opposing any attempts to legitimize the practice through legislation. The health implications have become a central point of contention. Namibia has one of the world's highest HIV/AIDS rates, and public health experts have identified Okujepisa Omukazendu as a potential factor in the spread of the virus. In a country where approximately 18.2% of the adult population lives with HIV, the practice raises serious public health concerns. However, traditional defenders argue that the practice actually reduces promiscuity and therefore might help contain, rather than spread, sexually transmitted infections. The legal debate has been particularly complex. Namibia's constitution guarantees both cultural rights and women's rights, creating a challenging legal tension. Legal experts have pointed out that formally recognizing the practice could conflict with various domestic violence laws and international human rights treaties to which Namibia is a signatory. The controversy led to the DTA distancing itself from Tuindo's proposal, calling the practice wrong and promising to take action against the legislator. Media coverage of the practice has itself become a source of controversy. Ringo Mutombo, a public relations officer in the office of the Prime Minister of Namibia, has criticized what he sees as sensationalist Western media coverage that misrepresents the practice. He particularly took issue with implications that tourists might have access to free sex in Himba communities, emphasizing that the practice is strictly limited to community members and trusted associates. The debate has also highlighted broader questions about cultural evolution and adaptation. Some younger members of the Himba community, particularly those who have received formal education or lived in urban areas, have begun questioning the practice. This has created intergenerational tensions within communities, with older members often viewing any questioning of the practice as a threat to their cultural identity. Economic modernization has added another layer of complexity. As more Himba people engage with the cash economy and urban lifestyle, traditional social bonds and support systems are changing. Some argue that practices like Okujepisa Omukazendu become less relevant or appropriate in this new economic context, while others maintain that these traditions help preserve community cohesion in the face of modernization. The role of international human rights organizations in this debate has been controversial. While many have condemned the practice as a violation of women's rights, others argue that Western-based organizations lack the cultural context to properly evaluate such traditions. This has led to broader discussions about cultural imperialism and the universality of human rights standards. Rural women have been identified as particularly vulnerable in this debate. According to human rights advocates, women who resist participation or refuse to comply with the practice can face severe consequences, including ostracism, physical abuse, and economic hardship. The isolation of rural communities can make it especially difficult for women to access support services or legal protection. Religious organizations have also entered the debate, with various Christian denominations generally opposing the practice as contrary to their teachings. This has created additional tensions in communities where traditional beliefs and Christian faith coexist, sometimes within the same families. The educational system faces challenges in addressing these cultural practices. Teachers and administrators must navigate the delicate balance between promoting modern values and respecting traditional customs, particularly in rural areas where the practice remains common. 5. Broader cultural context. Marriage, tradition, and social structure. To truly understand Okujepisa Omukazendu, we must examine it within the broader tapestry of Himba cultural practices and social structures. This practice doesn't exist in isolation but is part of a complex system of traditions, beliefs, and social arrangements that have evolved over centuries. The Himba approach to marriage itself is fundamentally different from Western concepts. Marriage among the Himba is primarily arranged, with girls often being promised to male partners chosen by their fathers when they reach puberty. While love matches do occur, particularly for second or subsequent marriages, the primary purpose of marriage is social and economic rather than romantic. This framework helps explain why practices like Okujepisa Omukazendu can exist without necessarily threatening the marital bond as it might in other cultures. The practice exists within a polygamous society where men commonly have multiple wives. According to research, this polygamous structure creates its own unique dynamics. The hierarchy among wives, for instance, influences how the practice of wife sharing is implemented. First wives often have different status and privileges compared to subsequent wives, and this affects their participation in or exemption from such customs. One of the most distinctive aspects of Himba culture is their approach to physical appearance and hygiene. The women are famous for their use of ojize, a paste made from ochre and butterfat that gives their skin and hair a characteristic red color. This practice, like many others in Himba society, serves both practical and cultural purposes. The red ochre protects their skin from the harsh desert sun while also embodying their ideals of beauty and cultural identity. The Himba's resistance to bathing with water, often misunderstood by outsiders, is another example of how their practices are adapted to their environment. Instead of water bathing, they practice smoke bathing, where they use the smoke from specific herbs for cleansing. This practice conserves water in their arid environment while maintaining hygiene standards appropriate to their context. Their living arrangements reflect their social structure. Villages are organized in a circular pattern around the sacred fire, Okuruo, which serves as a physical and spiritual center for the community. This arrangement facilitates the practice of wife sharing by providing specific spaces for visitors and maintaining clear social hierarchies within the community. The role of cattle in Himba society cannot be overstated. Beyond their economic value, cattle play a crucial role in social relationships, including marriage arrangements and conflict resolution. The number of cattle a man owns influences his social status and his ability to participate in practices like Okujepisa Omukazendu, as having multiple wives requires significant resources. The Himba's relationship with modernity is selective and strategic. While they maintain many traditional practices, including Okujepisa Omukazendu, they have adopted some modern conveniences when they find them useful. This selective modernization demonstrates their ability to maintain cultural identity while adapting to changing circumstances. Their spiritual beliefs deeply influence their social practices. The Himba believe in ancestor worship, and many of their social customs, including aspects of wife sharing, are connected to their spiritual worldview. The sacred fire in each village, maintained by a firekeeper, serves as a connection to their ancestors and influences many aspects of daily life. Education and knowledge transmission in Himba society occurs primarily through oral tradition and practical demonstration. Young people learn about marriage customs, including Okujepisa Omukazendu, through observation and gradual participation in community life rather than formal instruction. The concept of time in Himba culture differs significantly from Western linear time. Their days are organized around practical needs and social obligations rather than strict schedules. This different perception of time influences how practices like wife sharing are arranged and implemented. Their approach to property and ownership also differs from Western concepts. While individual ownership exists, there's a stronger emphasis on communal rights and obligations. This extends to relationships, where bonds between families and communities are seen as more important than individual preferences or exclusive partnerships. 6. Contemporary challenges. Navigating tradition in a modern world. The intersection of ancient practices with modern realities creates numerous challenges for the Himba people, particularly regarding the tradition of Okujepisa Omukazendu. These challenges range from health concerns to legal issues, from human rights considerations to the preservation of cultural identity in an increasingly globalized world. Perhaps the most pressing contemporary challenge is the HIV/AIDS crisis. Namibia's high HIV infection rate poses a serious threat to communities practicing wife-sharing customs. According to health statistics, the country's 18.2% HIV prevalence rate among adults is among the highest globally. While traditional defenders of the practice argue that it actually reduces promiscuity by channeling sexual relationships within known community networks, health experts express serious concerns about how the practice might facilitate virus transmission. The challenge lies in finding ways to maintain cultural practices while protecting public health, a balance that has proven difficult to strike. Technology and social media have introduced new complexities. Young Himba people, increasingly connected to the global community through smartphones and internet access, are exposed to different worldviews and lifestyle choices. This exposure has led to questioning of traditional practices, creating intergenerational tensions within communities. Some young people, especially those who have received formal education, find themselves caught between respecting their cultural heritage and embracing modern values that often conflict with traditional practices. Economic pressures present another significant challenge. The traditional pastoral lifestyle that supported these social customs is under threat from various factors, including climate change, urbanization, and changing economic patterns. As more Himba people seek employment in cities or engage in the cash economy, the traditional social structures that made practices like Okujepisa Omukazendu functional begin to break down. The question becomes, how can traditional practices adapt to new economic realities while maintaining their cultural significance? Legal frameworks pose particular challenges. Namibia's constitution guarantees both cultural rights and individual human rights, creating potential conflicts when traditional practices clash with modern legal standards. The failed 2014 attempt to legally formalize Okujepisa Omukazendu highlighted these tensions. The legal system must navigate between protecting cultural heritage and ensuring individual rights, particularly women's rights and consent. Tourism has created its own set of challenges. The Himba have become something of a tourist attraction, leading to misconceptions and sensationalization of their practices. Some tourists mistakenly believe they might have access to traditional hospitality practices, creating uncomfortable situations that community leaders must manage. The challenge is maintaining cultural authenticity while dealing with outside interest and potential exploitation. Education presents both opportunities and challenges. As more Himba children receive formal education, they're exposed to different value systems and ways of thinking. Schools must navigate the delicate balance between teaching modern concepts and respecting traditional values. This often creates tension between educational institutions and traditional community leaders. The role of women in modern Himba society is evolving. Young women, particularly those with education or exposure to urban life, increasingly question traditional practices that limit their autonomy. However, economic dependence and social pressure often make it difficult for women to openly challenge these customs. The community faces the challenge of addressing women's changing aspirations while maintaining cultural cohesion. Climate change poses existential threats to the Himba way of life. As their traditional pastoral lifestyle becomes more difficult due to changing weather patterns and increasing desertification, the social structures that supported practices like Okujepisa Omukazendu are also threatened. The community must find ways to adapt their traditions to environmental changes while maintaining their cultural identity. International pressure and human rights discourse create additional complications. While many human rights organizations criticize practices they view as harmful to women, the Himba often feel their cultural perspectives are misunderstood or dismissed by outsiders. This creates a defensive response that can make it harder to address legitimate concerns about consent and women's rights within the community. Healthcare access remains a significant challenge. Traditional practices need to be considered alongside modern medical knowledge and public health requirements. The challenge lies in finding ways to maintain cultural practices while ensuring community health and well-being, particularly in remote areas where medical facilities are scarce. As we conclude our exploration of this fascinating yet complex cultural practice, several key insights emerge that help us understand not just the Himba people, but the broader challenges of maintaining traditional practices in a rapidly changing world. The practice of Okujepisa Omukazendu reveals how cultural traditions that may seem shocking to outsiders can serve important social functions within their original context. It shows us that human relationships and social structures can be organized in ways very different from what we might consider normal or natural. This reminds us to approach cultural differences with humility and an open mind, even when they challenge our own values and beliefs. However, this exploration also highlights the very real tensions between cultural preservation and human rights. While we must respect cultural diversity, we cannot ignore legitimate concerns about consent, women's rights, and public health. The challenge for modern societies is finding ways to honor traditional cultures while ensuring the protection of individual rights and well-being. The Himba people's experience offers valuable lessons about cultural resilience and adaptation. Their selective approach to modernization, accepting some changes while maintaining core traditions, demonstrates how cultures can evolve while preserving their essential identity. This may provide insights for other traditional societies facing similar challenges in our increasingly globalized world. Looking ahead, the future of practices like Okujepisa Omukazendu will likely depend on how successfully communities can adapt them to address modern concerns while maintaining their cultural significance. This raises broader questions about how traditional societies can navigate the complex waters of modernization without losing their unique cultural heritage. Thank you for joining us on this journey of cultural discovery. If you found this exploration interesting, please like and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth looks at fascinating cultural practices from around the world. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective on how societies can balance tradition with modern values and human rights. Remember, understanding different cultural practices doesn't mean we have to agree with them, but it does help us develop a more nuanced and empathetic view of human society in all its diverse forms.